Everybody, welcome back to What's Better Than Great. This is Mike.
And Shana?
And today we are going to pose a question. Is the fear of death irrational? What?
I like that.
So, I just kind of got this kind of inspiration to talk about this. And I thought it would be helpful for a lot of people, especially kind of with what we're going through with the whole COVID thing. Because I know that there's a lot of fear going on, and that fear ultimately is essentially the fear of death. And so I wanted to talk about it because a part of what I wanted to talk about essentially when we talk about the fear of death is it smart? Is it even important, right, to fear death? And why is it so common? Or I don't really know why it's common, but
I think it's obviously, nobody knows for sure what happens after you die. So to me, it seems like it makes sense for people to be like, okay, I don't want to die because I have no idea what's going to happen. Am I going to go to heaven? Am I going to go to hell? Am I just going to be in total darkness? Or, you know what? Nobody knows. So it's like, of course you're going to have anxiety around it. So
right.
I personally think that I think it's rational. I mean, the same, the same way people are afraid of like, going to the doctor or something like that. It's like, you don't know what's going to happen. They may stick you with the needle. You don't know if it's going to be painful, whatever. Right. I think it's kind of the same thing. I think if everybody knew what would happen when you died, like, for sure that you're going to heaven, or for sure that it's basically just like a blip and all of a sudden you're in some sort of like not fantasy, but like, you're living on a cloud and everything is perfect. I'm sure there would be a lot less anxiety. But you know what? Some people are afraid because they don't want to leave the life that they already have. You know what I mean?
And I think one of the interesting things about this is that Shana is in the medical field as a nurse. I used to be a medic, an EMT, and we have both actually witnessed a death before, unfortunately, and also fortunately for this for the content of our conversation here. But I just kind of wanted to first, before we go into like, is it rational or is it irrational, right? Let's address the elephant in the room. Why do you think that we actually have the fear of death?
I would say that I think it's mainly because nobody has ever come back and been able to tell you what happened. So it's like, okay, you know what? I think the ritual around death, like you get buried 6 feet under, or you get put into an oven and burnt to ashes, like. That just seems pretty terrifying for most people. That's really the only concept that you have of death, and everybody's sad, and it's just everything around it. I think, when you think about, especially Western cultures, it's all about, it's everything surrounding death is bad. It's sad. You know what I mean? You have some cultures that celebrate death. You know what I mean? Like, they celebrate the fact that you've passed on, and some of it is based on their, preconceived notions of what the afterlife is like. But I think the reason why people fear it, at least in our culture, is because everything about it is sad and gloomy and terrifying. You know what I mean? So yeah,
I think it's the fear of the unknown. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I think that what ends up happening is, we don't really know what happens when people die, and we also don't like what we don't know. You know what I mean? Like, we want to be confident that something is or isn't going to take place, or this is how it's going to be, this is how it's going to feel. And if you don't have that, then a lot of people are like, oh no, this is worse than, anything.
Right.
But I think that it's the fear of the unknown or the fear that it may hurt. You know what I mean? I think, I think that that's the two fears that people really have, which if I, just to address, I guess kind of the way I see it is if it does hurt, or if, I guess not necessarily hurt, but if it were to be something that happened to you, like you fell off of let's say a cliff or something, right? I don't really think it would hurt. I think it would just be like lights out. You know what I mean? I think you would lose consciousness before you felt the pain. That's just my theory. I guess you don't, hopefully nobody just went visual on that. But
I mean, and I guess from a medical standpoint, you assume that you don't have, well, I mean, if we want to think about it from that point of view, the factors leading up to somebody's death is lack of oxygen to the brain.
Right.
So if you have a lack of oxygen to the brain, most of the time, it's pretty...
Yeah, you pass out.
Yeah, you pass out, you go unconscious. So, I don't know where you were going with that, but yeah, you're right. Anytime that you have some sort of traumatic injury, whatever it may be, and it causes that lack of oxygen to the brain, yeah, you're probably not going to be, you're not going to be conscious of it.
Right. And I've actually also had a lot of head trauma from playing football growing up. And I've had a lot of concussions, believe it. So I've only had one concussion that had like a brief stint of unconsciousness. And they didn't treat it like they do these days. Like now they stop the game, you get off the field, and you don't come back for a few games. Back then, you get off the field, the doctor, whoever it is, looks at you, and they're like, okay, you seem all right. You know what I mean? You go right back out there. What happens is you don't know, hey, it's kind of like, wait a minute, how did I lose consciousness? What happened? Like,
you lose time. Yeah. The next thing, the other thing you remember is waking up.
And you really don't feel the pain of the hit, right? It really is, it's more of a sound than a pain. I know, anyway, we're going a little bit off topic, but point being is, I really don't think that, I think that the fear of pain of death is kind of maybe not a thing to worry about for real. But before we move on, I kind of wanted to see how you felt about sharing your experiences or an experience of someone passing.
Well, and I can't remember for sure if this particular person died when they went into intensive care, but when I worked in the emergency department full time, I obviously wouldn't witness people going into cardiac arrest. Not most of the time when they came to us, they were already in cardiac arrest, but this particular person, we were actually talking. She was conscious. She was talking to the doctor. She seemed groggy, but she was coherent, and I just remember the doctor turning around to get some equipment or something, and I was watching her because they had stopped talking, and I just remember looking at her because I was like, her eyes were open. She wasn't saying anything, and then I got closer, and her eyes were dilated, and so I was like, okay, she's probably unconscious at this point. Checked the pulse. She had no pulse. She had gone into cardiac arrest. So, it took some time for her to get her heart, a pulse again. So at that point, technically, clinically, if you don't have a heart rate, you're, you don't have any oxygen going to the brain, you're technically dead. Right. You know what I mean? They obviously had to do a ultrasound of the heart just to make sure. that, the heart wasn't functioning anymore. But I just remember, if you want to say that the point of death was when I saw her eyes dilate and she didn't, and I recognized that she didn't have a pulse. It's hard to say if I mean, you're assuming that they're unconscious, so you're assuming they don't have any awareness as to what's going on. Right. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, I mean, that was probably one of the only times I've seen somebody go under like that, and have been conscious, right before. So yeah, I mean,
and you know what, that I think the interesting part to me is the thing that hits me is the dilated eyes, right? That's what I think about, is what caused her eyes to dilate, or what it means to have eyes that dilate. It's just, I mean, you have glasses, so you've probably had your eyes dilated before. Mm-hmm. Like, what is the experience like when a doctor dilates your eyes?
It just becomes more sensitive. I don't think that's necessarily why your eyes dilate. But I guess if you're thinking about it from a circulation standpoint, if you don't have a pulse,
I didn't really think about,
and there's really no oxygen, blood coming to your eyes to help with the function of your eyes, your iris, dilating and all that, because all that needs blood flow.
Right.
If there is no blood flow, naturally your iris in a relaxed state is dilated.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because it takes muscles of your iris to dilate. You know what I mean? So,
and that really, if you really kind of understand what's happening, probably is that your brain is essentially like a computer that's trying to store power and keep itself having all of the power from the body. Like, if everything's shutting down, the brain is the last thing that wants to go. So it's like, I'll shut off the eyes, I'll shut off the ears, I'll shut off the consciousness.
Right, and they call that shunting.
Right.
Where your body shunts all the blood. I mean, not all of the blood, but it tries to save your vital organs. So it focuses on your brain, your lungs, your kidneys, your liver, all that. So.
Right. And so the whole, I guess the way I look at it is, at that point, your ability to experience death is gone, I would assume, because of the fact that you're shunting. You can't necessarily speak. Nothing's happening, right? Mm-hmm. Physically, and the brain is shunting.
If you do come back, you don't remember anything. You don't remember. I mean, and you hear about those near-death. Well, yeah, you hear about those near-death experiences where people have died clinically, mm-hmm. and they talk about how they had an out-of-body experience where they were watching everything happen, and they're able to talk about I saw the doctor do this, and so I mean, I don't have any
There's no definitive answer
if those things are accurate or not. I don't know if those things are something that people can actually experience, but for the most part, when you lose time, you're just not conscious of what's actually happening. So the point at which you enter technically death, I don't know. I mean, I've had a situation where I've lost time before. I was taking a medication that helped me to sleep, and it also caused your blood pressure to drop significantly. And I guess I got to a point where it had dropped so much that I was sitting in a chair, and the last thing I remember was I fell asleep.
Right. And
when I finally came to, which seemed like a second, my cousin, who was, in the room with me, said she had already called 911 because I had passed out. My lips were turning blue. I wasn't responding. But for me, it just seemed like it was like a second, and then you know what I mean?
It didn't feel like didn't feel like things were actually happening. It was just like, it was like kind of like blinking. And then it's like, wait, why is everybody here? Or like, well, not blinking, because, or let's say like waking up.
Felt like I was resting. I was resting. I don't remember dreaming or anything. I just felt like you were coming out of a sleep, like you're kind of like, oh, what's going on,
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I I didn't have any awareness. It felt like I was just going to sleep. So
right. And you know what? I've had similar situations where I lost consciousness, and that is every time it was just I didn't realize I'd lost consciousness until I was waking up. You know what I mean? And so it's like, I think that would probably be the most likely scenario of at least entering death. Is it's like, okay, well, you know, I don't know if you've ever fell asleep watching a show, but it's kind of like that for me when I describe it, where it's like you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna watch this show, and you're out, you know, right? And so it's like you wake up like, dang it, I fell asleep, right? But with this, you don't necessarily realize that you're falling asleep, and you're not waking up. You get what I'm saying? So it's like, would you even know? You know what I mean? And so it's like, it's almost like that fear is almost maybe, because I could be wrong, but maybe that fear isn't really valid, right? We'll get into that in a minute about, is it rational? Is it not rational? Does it even make sense? All right. Right after this break. Did you know that 32% of Americans listen to podcasts monthly? It's a great way to start a business and share your thoughts on anything you want. Unfortunately, the cost of podcasting equipment and the challenges of editing and distributing your podcast is usually what stops people from getting started. That is until Anchor.fm. If you haven't heard of Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. Anchor will also distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, it can be heard on Apple Podcasts, and a whole lot more. You can make money from your podcast even without having a listenership, right? It's the easiest way to make a podcast. It's everything you need all in one place. So if you're ready to get started with your podcast, download the free Anchor app right now or go to anchor.fm to get started. That's anchor.fm. All right, everybody, welcome back to What's Better Than Great. We're going to talk about the fear of death, and is it even rational? Does it make sense? Is it stupid, right? And we've already been talking about this a little bit. So first, let me just, because we cannot give you the definitive, oh yeah, this is dumb, you should never fear death. Because, I mean, we all have to do it, right? It's everybody poops. Inevitable. Right. Everybody poops. Kind of like that book from, like, did your mom have that book when she was potty training you? Everybody poops.
Is that a thing?
Yes, it's a real thing.
Everybody poops.
My two little sisters had it.
Oh.
But anyway, so
that's hilarious.
The whole thing is that's what happened. Everybody does it, and so it's like we're not afraid of that part of life, but this is the thing we're afraid of. So ultimately, I guess here's what I want to do. I want to just pose it as a question to you, right? And in that way we can just kind of spitball it, because there's no real answer, right, that we can give anybody and say, yep, this is exactly true, right? This is just whatever's true to us is true to us. So right. What do you think about the fear of death? And I guess, are you afraid of death?
At this point, I would say no. And I guess it's not like I've never been afraid of death. I think the times my anxiety was heightened at the thought of dying was because I feel like I don't want to leave my family. I don't want to, right. You know, I feel like there's a lot of things I want to do, and the idea of it just ending like that is unnerving. It was unnerving to me, right. You know? So, you know, I think obviously for a majority of my life, well, I wouldn't say majority, because there was times where I was like, you know, I had my certain religious beliefs, and I felt like, man, am I going to go to hell? Am I going to, so part of it was that anxiety of like not knowing one way or the other, if my afterlife was going to be pleasant. Right. So that was a part of it. And then the other part, of course, is like pain, am I going to experience, is it going to be torture for me to have to go through this transition? And then it just got to a point where it was just like, man, I could pass. You just never know. And I'm not ready to. I'm not ready to leave, my family. I'm not ready to end this life, right. So I've grown to a point where I'm really, really looking forward to certain things that are, that I foresee for my future. And right. I don't want that to be cut short. So right. that was what my anxiety was like. I think more recently, especially working in the hospital and being around COVID patients and, just thinking about, you see on the news about how, you've got these healthcare workers that are passing because their exposure and, our own issues with lack of PPE and all that. And you're just thinking, man, I don't know if I'm going to make it out. You know what I mean? It's just one right. of those things where it's like, you really just don't know. Everybody, it's kind of like, the luck of the draw, not necessarily because everybody's kind of around people like that. So you just don't know, right. And so I was like, man, I really got to think about this, I'm not ready, obviously, but at this point, I think I've got to a point where I've accepted it because it's just, I don't want to live my life with anxiety right, about right. it. I just want to I want to enjoy whatever life I have, the rest of my life, right. So, I just got to a point recently where I was just like, whatever, it doesn't matter anymore. I just have to enjoy my life and do things I want that make me happy and forget about, because I think when you're afraid of it, it's almost like you're resisting right. the idea of your mortality. And right. I think people when you have the anxiety about dying, it's almost like you're living, you don't really get a chance to live, because you're filled with anxiety. So I made a commitment to no longer fear death or my mortality. And that way I can enjoy my life, right. And it's, and do the things that I can do.
Right. And what's interesting is that I think that really I'll say this, I'm not afraid of death, but it's exactly what you said, which is so interesting is like, I feel like the key to, I guess, having a healthy fear for death, if you want to call it that, is I'm not afraid of death being painful or death being some scary thing, right? Because I've accepted it, right? I accept it as something that, like I said, everybody poops, right? So it's something that it's gonna happen, and I'm not trying to run away from that fact or hide the fact that it happens to everybody from myself. But I think that the power that you have by accepting death is that now death is just a thing, right? And it's an inevitability. And so you get to a point where, like you said, instead of me waiting for it to happen and trying to avoid it every second of the day until it does, and letting it kind of mold my activities and the things that I'm willing to do, because I don't want to die or make a mistake that could make my life worse and then die, right? Like everybody's trying to, not everybody, but a lot of people try to keep themselves from having any pain during life or anything that's, I guess, a setback in life, and then they die. Mm-hmm. And so they never really actually live.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I think that's really that's really where I got to for me as well is, and it was before the COVID thing for me. Luckily, I had my own experience with it. But before that, I had other experiences that felt like I had an assumed near-death experience, at least from my perspective. that made me feel like afraid of death at first, right? And so everything I did, I was trying to avoid it. And then I got to a point where I guess, if I'm going to be open and transparent, I was suicidal at one point. And so the thing that stopped me from actually going through with it was seeing one of my children's spoons, right? And it was a toddler spoon, a baby spoon for like eating baby food. And it made me like, okay, you don't do this because this is going to affect your children, right? Mm-hmm. And so at that point, I really had a conversation with myself. It's like, okay, well, why, if you are willing to die, mm-hmm. right, then you kind of have accepted it. Mm-hmm. So if you're willing to die, but you're also not happy with your life, don't kill yourself. Go after the thing you want, because that's also the solution to your fear of death, or you wanting death, or the unhappiness, I guess, right, that caused that. So that's more of my personal story.
No, I mean, I think that's really important for, obviously that you're not the only person that's experienced, what it's like to go through, have the idea, man, I wish, I could end all of this because of, whether it be because of stress, because of, pain, or, just life, right. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure there are a lot of people that have had those thoughts go through their head, but I think that you're right. I think when you get to a point where it's like, it's kind of in front of you, right? It really sobers you up, right? It sobers you up, especially when you have something, you do have something that reminds you that you have something to live for, right? You know what I mean?
And I think that's kind of to, take the risk of veering off into the topic of like realizing that there's not really a reason to kill yourself. I think that the thing that would help most people to realize their value and to realize that, their life is worth living ultimately is to essentially understand like, hey, you know what? If there's people that are making my life a living hell, there's something that I'm holding back, right? Because it's not necessarily just the fact that the people are making your life horrible. It's that on some level, there's something you want to do, but you're afraid to do it, right? There's something you want to say, but you're afraid to say it, mm-hmm. right? And I would say if you're getting to the point where it's that bad, then there's nothing holding you back anymore from just saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to speak my mind. I'm going to go after the things and do the things that I'm afraid to do. Mm-hmm. And it's hard. It's extremely hard to do the things that you're afraid to do. But I made a deal with myself, right? And this is probably the key to me even being able to overcome a lot of my fears, and the things that held me back was just being like, okay, well, I can kill myself any day, right? And I still give myself that permission to this day. Like, if it gets to the point where it's like I have nothing at all, and I don't want to do any of this anymore, and I don't have the ability to go after the things that I want, right? Or do the things that I feel are important to me. Okay, it's done. We're over. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, you did your best. But I refuse to, at that moment, I refuse to say, okay, I'm going to take a backseat in my own life. Right. And every time I feel that need to take a backseat in my own life, I say, okay, well, are you going to kill yourself today? And it's like the most eye-opening question. And I'm literally feeling like the tears well up in my eyes thinking about it. But it immediately wakes you up and says, nah, I'm going to get what I want. I'm going after what I want. And it's really empowering to accept your own mortality.
Yeah, it is. It really is. And I think you get to a point which I've gotten to the point where it's like, and I've said this before, it's like when you face it and you accept it and you realize that you have no idea what number, what day, you really just don't. And it's like, why worry? And it's like, well, you throw all the anxiety out of the window. You know what I mean? It's like, whatever.
Yeah.
What am I doing? I'm just gonna, at the end of the day, you just want to enjoy life. So
exactly.
The question is, what is the question again?
Is the fear of death even rational?
I think to answer that clearly, I think it's rational. I do. I think that I think humans naturally fear what they don't understand.
Right.
And that manifests through a lot of different things, anxiety, anger, bigotry, whatever. I think it's only natural, but I think it is futile, because it's like, it really is counterproductive, because you fear death and you're afraid to die.
Right. And you know what? And I guess that's how I feel about it. The fear of death is absolutely rational at first, right? Because I think you need to fear death so that you can eventually accept the fact that you will die. Mm-hmm. And that you have to choose to live, because you can be animated in terms of like your physical body moving around and you doing things, but you're not actively choosing to live your life. Right. So I think that's the key to me, is that the fear of death leads to the acceptance, which leads to you choosing to live to your fullest potential. Right. And having that, like, for me, I guess you can say I don't have a fear of death, but I use it as motivation to move myself on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, okay, well, the one day it's going to be over, and you don't want to I want to squeeze every last drop out of my life. I want to squeeze all the goodness out. So if I can, and if my body allows me, and if time allows me, the universe allows me to continue to go, then go hard and go all day, every day.
Because why not?
Right.
Why not? If your days are numbered and you don't know, why not just do what the hell you want to do? That's kind of my motto at this point. Within safety, obviously being safe, and obviously being, considering others, but why not just do what you want to do? You just don't know. And I think that's what life is all about, is exploring and taking risks and conquering your fears, and just following your dreams, following your ambitions. So
yeah, I think that is probably the biggest thing you can do. Anyway, I want to take a quick break, but before we do, before we end this show, I want to talk about one thing that I think is really important, which is if you are struggling with the fear of death, right, and you want to get over it, what can you do to just come to the point where you can get over it, right? You have acceptance of it. So we'll talk about that after this break. Okay, welcome back to What's Better Than Great. And in this section, we're going to talk about how to get over the fear of death, right? And this is obviously going to also be something that's a little bit more of a personally, you have to shift this to you personally if this is something that you want to try to do. But I think that everyone has to approach it almost like I guess the best way to say it is step by step. So actually, before we get into step by step, I guess, what do you think? If you're trying to overcome, or if somebody said, "Hey, I want to get over my fear of death," right? Uh-huh. And since you have accepted death, essentially, you've accepted so that it's. I mean, it does, but it's the reality of it. If you've accepted if you've accepted the reality of it, right? You've accepted that it will happen. And so you don't have the fear of it. What got you to the point where you accepted it,
I think what that got me to that point was the realization that it could be close.
Right.
You know, I think that sobers you up extremely quickly.
Right.
You know, like, and I'm sure people have experienced this, like when they talk about their life flashing before their eyes with near-death experiences, like you realize that it's you know, it could be soon.
Right.
So you get to a point where you're just like, okay, well, if this is something I know to be possibly true, then what am I doing being afraid? What am I doing being anxious? I want to, you know, squeeze every last drop out of this life to enjoy what I have so far.
Right.
You know, so that's what happened for me. Now, as far as a step-by-step, you know, process, you know, I guess everybody has to come to accepting death in their own way. I wouldn't say it's going to be the same for everybody, but I think honestly, it's just realizing
how close it is.
Right. Well,
or it could be.
Yeah. I mean,
at all times,
you just don't know. And it's like, I don't know how to say it any better than that, to be honest with you. Right. I think it's just realizing the truth of it and just trying to squeeze every last drop out of your life.
And you know what? I think that for me, it really boils down to, because of, I guess, maybe the way that it happened with me, I had a moment where I immediately accepted it as not only something that was going to happen, but was going to happen like at a certain point in time that I was in control of. And then I didn't do it. And so it's like I'm not telling anybody to do that, by the way, obviously. That would be a foolish way to do this. And I'm not telling you to take risks, right? I'm not telling you to...
Yeah, if you're feeling suicidal, you need to...
you need to get as much help as you can get. You need to get
medical help, for sure.
Yes, because, you know, your life is definitely valuable, not only for you, but the people who you don't know that you inspire, right? Or you don't maybe think that you inspire. But getting back to the point, I think that what it really boils down to is that you really do have to you have to say, I mean, shoot, I could die in the next week. You know what I mean? And honestly know that it is a fact that you could die in the next week. Or like, I could literally drive to the store and die. Will I come back next time I go to get, you know, my Q-tips from the store, or buy my 17 packs of toilet paper that I'm hoarding? Like, you don't know that it isn't right here, right now. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, I've met people 20-30 minutes right before they died, and it was actually when I was a kid, right, teenager, right? It was on the news. I met the person at night at you know, basically coming out of a bar, and then I got home about an hour or 2 hours later, and she was on the news as soon as my TV came on, having run into, you know, had a car accident. So, point being is, you don't know, and the people who you know don't know. And it could be right, you know, in the next 20 minutes. It could be in the next 40 years, right? But I think that the most important thing is to just know as a certainty and accept as a certainty that death is going to happen in your life and in the life of everybody you know. And eventually, right, what that means too is like, this may be the question in your head. I don't know, maybe not. Was my life even important? Right? Did I matter?
Or did you enjoy yourself? You know what I mean?
Right.
Did you really get to a point where you were enjoying your life?
I guess for me, the reason why I asked that question is because the answer is, did it matter to you? Did you do something that mattered to you?
Right.
You know what I mean? If you didn't, then why not? What held you back? Right? And does it really make sense to let it hold you back if you know that you could die today, you could die next week? You get what I'm saying? And so ultimately, I think that that's the most valuable thing, is like, you're not going to escape it. So you might as well accept it, right? Number one, you got to pay taxes if you make money. You know what I mean? Number two is, well, if I have to do this, am I living in a way that makes my life feel like it was valuable to me, right? And if the answer is no, what held me back from doing the things, or what has been holding me back from doing the things that I feel are important?
Why not just go after what you want?
Right, exactly. And I think that is probably, if I were to say it, it's probably those three steps. It's like, just, realize that it's going to happen, right? Ask yourself, are you basically happy if it happened right now, right? Am I happy with my life if it ended in the next 10 minutes? And if the answer is no, I would say you need to make a plan to find your purpose, right? Find your purpose in life, and only you can decide
and just
what that
do
is.
what you want to do.
Right.
I mean, within reason, within the confines of being safe with yourself and with others. Just do what you want to do. You know what I mean? Like, I sometimes feel like people get so, and this is something I disagree with, get so caught up in trying to find your purpose. You spend your entire life trying to find this and find that. It's like, what do you love? Right. What do you love about your life? What do you love to do? What makes you, get excited to get up in the morning? You know what I mean? And do that. And exactly. Appreciate it and enjoy it.
Your purpose is your drive. What drives you to make today great for you, right? Every day, right? So that could literally be, I love being a great mom. I love to cook. I love to, whatever. I love being a, mechanic. I love working on a car. It doesn't matter. And it's not necessarily that you're finding a purpose. So I'm glad that you said that. I think that what it is that you're allowing yourself to listen to the voice that's been in your head since you were a kid, saying, I really want to do this, but everybody tells me it's not realistic. Everybody tells me it's not possible. And actually, I wrote an article about it on the site. It's about it says it's called Discovering Your Purpose, I think is what it is. I'll put it in the show notes. But you really it really is just, it's almost every time that I've ever had a conversation with anybody about their purpose, it's something that they wanted their whole life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's not, if that's the case, then you don't really discover your purpose. You just accept it, just like you accept death. You know what I mean? And so I think that's a good place to kind of wrap this up. What do you think? Do you have anything else you wanted to add?
I think I've made all the points I could make.
Right. Again, I just want to go ahead and say thank you guys for listening. You can check us out on Instagram and just reach out and say hi. Let us know what you think about this episode, man. That would be beautiful, because I feel like this episode is groundbreaking to me, right? It's not something that a lot of people talk about or you hear about a lot. So let me know your thoughts on Instagram at What's Better Than Great. You can also find us on our website or on our YouTube channel. Thank you for listening. And this is Mike.
This is Shana.
And we'll talk to you next time.